VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are kicking it on the December 18th edition, 1 week before Christmas. Usually I have Josh Fry on Wednesdays, but he is traveling, commuting to see family for the holidays, so you're stuck with me today. And what we're going to start to walk to, a reasonable task because the Vikings are 12-2, is the Super Bowl formula and how the Vikings can be a part of that or are already a part of it. When I started writing about the Vikings, coming up on almost 5 years ago now, I started to look around the landscape of the NFL to see which teams were winning the Super Bowl. And of course, it's usually a Brady or a Mahomes led team. And you wanted to see what are the key components. And unusually for me, this isn't like a huge statistical thing. Not like, oh, they got to win the turnover differential, blah, blah, blah. This is the components of the roster and the attributes of teams that win Super Bowls as of the last decade, what they have. And then for the purposes of today's show, do the Vikings have that? So we're going to launch into that, and strangely, depending on how far you stretch the criteria, how far you're willing to expect that the rate of the Vikings' continued production continues, the Vikings actually have most of these components that are the common denominators for Super Bowl winning teams. So this formula, it's 5 parts, spans about back to a decade or so. I think that is the most reasonable cutoff because you don't really want to go back to apply Super Bowl winners from 1995 and what they did. It's better to do it in the modern NFL. So we're going to use the last decade as the criteria. And unlike most of my shows, I did not rank this formula like, hey, we get to number one. That's the very top thing that you need. So the 5 parts are kind of scattered in terms of importance, so you can interpret which one is the most important. But the key takeaway is when we get to the end, for the most part, the Vikings have these, or at least they're not wickedly outside of the conversation from having them in general. So the first one is most Super Bowl winners from the last decade are efficient at running the ball at at least average clip, and they usually do so without a big name running back. I don't know if you've noticed this, probably so. The era of employing a big name bell cow like Emmitt Smith as your running back and going to win a Super Bowl in late January back then and then February now, those days are over, utterly kaput. Usually, you just need somebody like the Patriots, a committee, LeGarrette Blount, go sign him and see how things goes. The Patriots, those teams with Jerick McKinnon, for example, or even the Rams when they won it, it was like Darrell Henderson and the gang. So, unusually, teams in the last decade don't invest major resources in winning a Super Bowl. Now, teams that get there and lose, like Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers, that strategy works, but the goal isn't to lose the Super Bowl, it's to win it. So typically, the Super Bowl winners employ a running back by committee, and they haven't broke the bank spending on running back. So the Vikings are right here in that they have the efficiency at running back. Depending on which metric you want to use, they rank, I think it's DVOA, 17th in running the football, and that's up from 27th in the last 2 seasons. So step by step, the Vikings are getting there. They do employ a relatively big name running back in Aaron Jones. My good friend Yannick Eckhart and I joked after the Vikings game beating the Bears that, oh, this running back is too popular for them to win a Super Bowl, at least on how historically these teams have done it in the last 10 years or so. But the important takeaway is the Vikings are no longer in the basement when it comes to rushing efficiency. Last year, they employed Alexander Mattison for 3/4 of the season, stubbornly at RB1, and he wasn't good in that role. He should be remembered as a pretty darn good RB2 behind Dalvin Cook for those 4 or 5 seasons. But the Vikings have changed how they do offense regarding running the football, because last year they didn't do it very much. Their play calling percentage of running was down in the toilet. And this year they're running at about an average clip, but they're sticking to it more, and that's encouraging. So I will say that having a efficient running game, relatively efficient, and then kind of a committee with Cam Akers, sometimes Ty Chandler, the Vikings can check this one off. They could not do that last year or even in 2022. Even though Dalvin Cook had some big touchdowns, the rushing efficiency still ranked in the bottom 6 of the NFL. So number 1, running back efficiency often by committee. Number 2 is tight end production. And if you are a dynastic fan of the Patriots or the Chiefs, Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski can tell you all about this. Most of the teams that win Super Bowls have pretty fantastic production from the tight end. Now, you can argue in the good old days of Kyle Rudolph that the Vikings did or did not have this, but they certifiably have it now with TJ Hawkinson. He is getting more acclimation to the offense every week, becoming more reliable, more dependable since the ACL tear, courtesy of Kirby Joseph. But most Viking seasons of my lifetime, up until 2022, the Vikings tight end position was either decent, pretty good with Kyle Rudolph, especially in the red zone, but it didn't quite compare to what the recent Super Bowl standard is, and that is employing a dude like Travis Kelce or Rob Gronkowski for Tom Brady and being able to be that safety valve when your pass catchers on the outsides are covered up. So Hawkinson is getting more work each and every week, and then you can see it in the flesh. He converts, especially in that Bears game at Soldier Field in the fourth quarter and in overtime. Hawkinson was huge. And each week, he's getting more attention in the offense, and that's going to be extremely vital in the postseason, which the Vikings are going to no matter what. Because there will be some games where Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson don't both get 7 receptions like they have the last 2 games. Suddenly, we figured out that both guys can eat at the same time, whereas under Kevin O'Connell and with Addison on this team, it's kind of one guy or the other. But when all else fails, you'll be able to rely on TJ Hawkinson and go look back at the last 10, 11 Super Bowl winners. They usually have a tight end or at least get a lot of production from their tight end in the postseason. So running back efficiency, often by committee, tight end production, check for these Vikings in my estimation. The next one is very crucial, and we can finally say that we, for the most part, kind of have this, and that is sturdy offensive line play. Now, you will remember deep in your bones that during the Mike Zimmer era, we did not have sturdy offensive line play. In fact, we got really excited for guys like Drew Samia when they were drafted, or signing Riley Reif as a big solution. Now, even without Christian Darrisaw, the Vikings' offensive line is bookended nicely with Brian O'Neill, certainly, who should go to a Pro Bowl, and hopefully he's healthy for this week. And then Cam Robinson, who's kind of been up and down, but mostly up since he joined the Vikings about a month ago now. And then we always kind of feel like it's a scourge in the middle with Blake Brandel, Garrett Bradbury, and Dalton Reisner. But last week, heading into Week 15, Ben Baldwin, like the godfather of NFL analytics, he tweeted the pass protection grades and rankings. And the Vikings were right there at 13th. And I can tell you that in years past, especially towards the middle and end of the Mike Zimmer era, usually you'd pull that bitch up and the Vikings would be like 25th habitually. And now we flip the script. We're in the league's top half, certainly. And then this year, right about number 13. And you can kind of expect if Christian Darrisaw would not have got hurt, they'd be closer to the top 10. But the takeaway is, although this is not a elite or gangbusters offensive line, it's able to do the trick with Sam Darnold a lot because of his escapability, which Kirk Cousins did not really have. So I would say that this one, although a little bit of a stretch, and there's still time for it to improve, the Vikings have the offensive line criteria checked off, and we couldn't say that, for example, in the 2020 season. But we're finally there, and a lot of this is a testament to right now Brian O'Neill, the work that he does. And then the middle of the offensive line, you have Garrett Bradbury, who's not a good pass protector, but he's a good run blocker. Blake Brandel, who started the season hot and has cooled off. And then Dalton Reisner, who is the opposite of Bradbury, a good pass protector, but poor run blocker. So it's a hodgepodge to be sure, but the Vikings do like the continuity that they have, even after benching Ed Ingram. But usually the teams that get to and win a Super Bowl have an offensive line that is decent. And sometimes if the Eagles, even though I don't know if they're going to win the Super Bowl, they're pretty damn elite, or even the Lions right now, their offensive line is fantastic despite all of the other injuries on the team. So running back efficiency, often by committee, tight end production, sturdy offensive line play. Next one might be the most important because it's the most visible to our viewing experience, is clutch quarterback performance. Now, there have been quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls that are not named Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes in the last decade. But the one thing in common about them, like with Nick Foles, for example, is they get hot at the right time. And when called upon in postseason games, they deliver. Now, a month and a half ago, we did not know if Sam Darnold would have this characteristic. And we still don't know for sure on a grand playoff stage if he'll have the juice to lead the Vikings back down 6 with 4 minutes to go. But I will tell you, we've seen inklings of it during the regular season. We spent most of our time for the first 2 months of our Vikings viewing experience, trying to wonder if Sam Darnold would fall off. Is this a mirage? We watched Dobbs last year, Josh Dobbs. He had 2 good games, and then that was it. Totally cooked, not any good. And with Sam Darnold, we probably didn't have that exact paranoia, but when he was the NFC Player of the Month in September, you had to wonder and expect for a regression to hit. Now, arguably, that kind of did. Sam Darnold does not still have that September pace, nor would he probably ever be on the docket to do that. But he has never once had a truly rotten experience game, and then the Vikings either got crushed or we couldn't believe what we saw for Sam Darnold. Against Jacksonville, he was not good, but the Vikings held on and won 12-7. And that means something. There were games during the Kirk Cousins era, usually about 1 per year, where he was outlandishly flat and not good, and the whole enterprise, the purple team, just went to the depths of hell. We don't have that right now, and that is a key aspect, I think, of Super Bowl contending teams, is even when your quarterback is off. He was kind of off against the Bears on Monday Night Football. You find a way to win by 18 points. So the clutch quarterback criteria of the five-part Super Bowl plan is when the game is on the line, kind of like Nick Foles in the 2017 run. Can you trust the guy? And I think we saw the game-winning drive from Darnold against the Cardinals when Aaron Jones had his redemption moment, and then certainly against the Bears at Soldier Field when that game went haywire. Darnold was clutch in the fourth quarter and clutch in overtime. So this guy was drafted 3rd overall 6 years ago now, almost 7. And usually if a guy goes that high and he gets paired with the right system or coach, he does have the clutch gene. So believe it or not, entering the postseason, although I have to see more boxes checked in general to believe the Vikings will win the Super Bowl. This guy, I will trust Sam Darnold in those pressure cook situations because he's shown me in the regular season he can do it. He hasn't shown me anything else that says, oh God, he's going to flop when the game's on the line. But above all else, and this is Captain Obvious stuff, when the postseason hits, you have to have a quarterback that if he's not, a top 5 guy of all time or in the regular season that season, he needs to be good or hot in certain moments. All right, the final one, the Vikings probably they can hang their hat on the most out of all of these criteria is either a good, great defense or a hot defense in the postseason. There have been Chiefs defenses during the Super Bowl run that if you would have taken a snapshot of them in Week 7, you would have said, ay caramba, these guys suck. But then they turned it on late in the season, they got to the postseason, and they were pretty damn good. So right now, the Vikings don't have to worry about, hey, will these guys figure it out by the postseason on defense? No, they're already a top 3 bunch and top 2 if you trust DVOA or EPA per play. So I will continue to say this, even when the Vikings were, 5-2, 6-2 back in early November. No matter what, they had a Super Bowl caliber defense. As long as you didn't have the Lions level of injuries, hit. The Vikings defense right now is Super Bowl caliber. It's kind of cool when you look around the depth chart at all of the guys who start. When we get to Sunday against the Seahawks, every guy that starts on the Vikings defense, you can look at his name, all 11, 12 guys, and be like, that guy is pretty good. There's no weak spots. Even with Jonathan Bullard, he has his niche. He's a good run stopper. But from Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, Harrison Phillips, Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, Stephon Gilmore, Byron Murphy, Harrison Smith, Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum. These are all solid football players. They may not have like Aaron Donald type. You probably have the future Hall of Famer in Harrison Smith, but he's 35 years old. Every single starting commodity on the defense is a really good football player. So I think that, compiles to say this defense is pretty damn good, and it shows it in the numbers. They are 3rd in points allowed, 2nd in DVOA, and 2nd in EPA on defense. And I think this is the most important one because if you do have a game in the wild card round where Darnold looks like the old Darnold, the game isn't automatically lost because you have this pretty sweet defense that can do a lot in those situations. So to recap, usually the Super Bowl winning team has an efficient running game that isn't like the best in the NFL, but it's passable, it's serviceable, and it's usually just no-name guys. It's really weird how that's worked out between the Patriots and the Chiefs run. Certainly at tight end, you have a big-name guy, whether it's Travis Kelce, Robert Gronkowski, our case TJ Hawkinson, or at least a guy who contributes in the postseason that is more than just like 2 catches and 20 yards. He's a guy that's moving the sticks and is impactful late in games. Number 3 is sturdy offensive line play. This one is a little flexible. If you assume that the Vikings continue at their current rate, which is about 13th, 14th best in the NFL per pass production, you need an offensive line that isn't total garbage. And thankfully, the Vikings have that. Of course, clutch quarterback performance, which we think Sam Darnold will have in the postseason. And then to me, the most important one is either an really good defense or one that gets hot in the postseason. And the Vikings defense got hot starting in week 1 and it's just carried on the whole time outside of 2 hiccups against the Lions and Rams. So there you have it. The Super Bowl formula, ironically, applies to these Vikings in a season where they were supposed to win about 6 or 7 games. And I guess the only problem is there are other teams that have these criteria checked off as well. But we're going to hope that the Vikings are the ones that finally break on through. All right, that's all I got for today. We'll be back Friday, I believe, talking to Sal Spice about her take on these 12-2 Vikings. Skol, baby.